Now, we've been talking about externalities, which is a situation where people are making a decision that has some costs that fall on third parties. We're going to take a different perspective in this lecture and think about the nature of a type of a good, how that nature might affect the ability to get to an efficient, optimal, invisible hand outcome. Now we're going to see four categories, but the two categories where things particularly go wrong are public goods and common pools. So, setting the stage, what's going on here? Let me take myself off the screen for just a second. Oops. There we go. Now you can see all this. So we're looking at situations where your individual rationality doesn't lead necessarily to the collectively rational outcome. Right? So a situation where we have a failure of the system itself to direct your self-interest towards a pro-social outcome. So with externalities, we saw that you do what makes sense for you, what you produce or you purchase where the benefits exceed the costs, but that's the private benefits and the private costs, and it might be the case that the social costs exceed the social benefits. All over the place, we have collective decision-making situations where we end up with these sorts of problems. And we'll see that the perspective we're looking at in this lecture can be particularly helpful, especially for thinking about how politics can go weird. A few years ago, there was the example of Wells Fargo's executives having incentives that were too strong and led to their subordinates creating all kinds of phony accounts. That, again, can be better understood with the perspective we're going to be exploring right now. Definitely group assignments, or if you've lived with roommates, right, you run into a lot of problems where you could think of them as externalities, but you could also think of them as being related to what we see with common pool resources. All right, and just as a general warning, right, sometimes we see a problem, but we have to ask, is it a big enough problem? Right? We talked about this with externalities. Sometimes the problem just isn't worth doing. Now, normally we'd do this in class, but I want you to pause for a moment and just, a piece of scratch paper, your notes, just brainstorm as much as you can. What are some examples of public goods? All right, so pause. All right, you're back. So we start with an example, NASA. When we ask this in class, we get a whole bunch of examples, and what we end up finding is that a lot of them don't actually line up with the economic definition of what a public good is. Instead, we often get examples of things that are publicly provided, but not necessarily a public good. So there's a really easy example, right? A sort of standard thing. Let me show you an example. So here's a private good, a jar of peanuts. A jar of peanuts is a private good. It is excludable and rivalrous, terms we'll explain in just a minute. But if you imagine that the government sent me these peanuts, that doesn't change the nature of the good, right? It's still definitely a thing where there's costs and benefits, but there's no real spillover. There's no public aspect to this. Right? It's just a straightforward private good. The benefits are private to me, the costs are private to the peanut farmer. Let's ignore the externalities of nitrogen blooms in the Gulf of Mexico and pollution and all that stuff. It's just a nice straightforward good, nice and easy. You look at something like NASA, that's a little less straightforward, right? So NASA is something where it is directly impacting some people, but in a lot of cases, we just kind of all are happy that NASA's out there learning about the universe for us. It's very different than something like a jar of peanuts. All right, let me go back to our screen. So what defines a public good to an economist is not where it's coming from or who's paying for it. It's not a matter of taxpayers pay for it and therefore it's a public good. It's a matter of having the features that make it fall into the category we call public goods. So the two margins on which we're going to think about different goods are they excludable and are they rivalrous? So I think a really good example of a public good is something like asteroid defense. So an asteroid's coming towards Earth, and we need to send Bruce Willis into space to blow it up. When Bruce Willis blows up the asteroid, he blows it up for everyone. So if you don't pay him, he can't make it so that you don't get saved. If he's going to save one person, he's going to save everybody. And it's also non-rivalrous. So when someone is saved, that doesn't mean that someone else can't be saved, right? Again, you can't save one person without saving everybody, but you're not using up the life-savingness of this good, right? So you getting saved doesn't mean that there's less life-saving effort to go around to save me. All right, now we set this up with the point that publicly provided isn't the same as necessarily being a public good. Let's take a quick digression and ask about what is a government. This is something where we've all lived our entire lives in a world filled with governments, and it's kind of one of these things that just blends into the background. So let's take a second and ask, what is a government? What distinguishes it from any other organization? And the fundamental feature that distinguishes, say, the U.S. government from Amazon or the Catholic Church or your local gardening club, what a government has that other organizations don't is this ability to use coercion. So strictly speaking, a government is a local monopoly on coercion. We'll talk about monopoly later in the semester, but what this means is the government is the one organization that can say, I'm going to force you to do something. If you don't pay your taxes, I'm going to throw you into jail. If you attack someone, we're going to lock you up. Right? Amazon can't lock you up. They can ask the government to send a sheriff to escort you off the premises, but Amazon can't force you to do something. Right? Only a government can do something. I can tell you you have to do your homework, but I can't coerce you to do your homework. All I can do is withhold grades. But if you don't pay your taxes, the government can take you away. So when we have problems caused by people responding to their incentives by voluntarily choosing to do certain things or not do certain things, the government is in a unique position to do something about those problems. So we'll see when we talk about the problems created by the nature of a good, it might be that we want the government to come in and regulate behavior because they are literally able to, right? The government is able to force people to stop doing things or to specifically have to do certain things. So this could be done, directly. We could say, the government's going to prohibit you from murdering people or stealing, or they're going to require that you have insurance when you drive a car on a public road, or it could be relatively indirect. We could say you have to pay your taxes, and if you don't, you're going to get locked up. So a government has that ability to coerce, which can hopefully be used to get us out of the sorts of problems we're going to be talking about. Now, another little deeper digression is we also have this notion of if we don't have a government, then we are in a state of anarchy, and anarchy leads to chaos, and chaos leads to bad things. And that certainly can be the case, but we have two different words, and they do mean different things. Anarchy means we don't have someone literally in charge, and chaos means that things are disordered. So we can have chaotic environments even if we have a government, and we can have orderly environments even without a government. Anarchy just means we don't have a government. In the real world, we have a lot of situations where there isn't someone in charge or some government in charge, and things are fundamentally anarchic. If you look at the situation between governments, the United Nations isn't a world government that can impose order from the top down. So when Russia deals with Ukraine, we are dealing with parties interacting in an anarchic environment. There isn't some overarching umbrella organization. So we do have literal anarchy in the world, and in some cases it doesn't work out, like with Russia invading Ukraine, but in some cases it works out just fine, right? So that the United States and the European Union don't have someone over top of them making things work, it still works out fine because there's enough positive sum interactions that both governments have incentive to behave in an orderly fashion, even though there isn't someone who could take someone and lock them up for breaking the rules. So related to this, and this is a very Coasean notion, government is not the same thing as governance. Governance is sort of this system of getting people to behave in an orderly fashion, and that can be a lot easier if you have some organization around that is allowed to lock you up for doing the wrong things, but we don't necessarily need that. So there's an article from 2014, the formatting isn't showing up well here, but if you look on Econ Talk, Arnold Kling, on econlib.org, I'll put the link to that in the description for this video. But, so, why am I going into this digression? First off, we learn a lot of important things by studying anarchy. We learn how to better cooperate without depending on someone else imposing order from the top down, right? Big part of what we want to do going out into the world is to be self-governing democratic citizens. And to do a good job of that requires us being able to solve our problems from the bottom up rather than requiring someone to impose a solution from the top down. All right, let's get back to public goods. So, public goods, they are non-rivalrous, non-excludable. So, non-excludable, this means that you can't, maybe it's easier to think the other way around. Something is excludable if you can keep someone from getting the good when they don't pay for it, right? So a private good you don't get unless you don't pay, or you don't get unless you do pay. So my peanuts, I get the peanuts because I paid at the store to get the peanuts. If I didn't pay, I would have been excluded from having access to those goods. Now, because people don't get peanuts unless they pay for them, people have a strong incentive to grow and distribute peanuts because there's a profit incentive. When something's non-excludable, it becomes much easier for people to free ride and therefore for people to not get paid for providing the good, and therefore we don't get enough of the good. When something's non-rivalrous, it just becomes a little bit harder because things are a little less directly tied, right? The costs and benefits and prices are not tied together the way they are for peanuts. Something that's non-rivalrous, something where maybe another example that's easier to think about here is a streaming service. So when you sign up for HBO and you're watching whatever the new show is, what's the new show? The Last of Us. If you're watching an episode of The Last of Us, there's still plenty of the show to go around for other people. That is a kind of a subtle impact on the potential optimality. It basically means that it's a little bit easier to underproduce something, right? So something like a show, it costs very little for another person to watch. And so because HBO does get a price, that is something that is excludable, we get a little bit too little of the thing. Now, this will be a little bit easier if we lay out what are our basic types of goods. Now, this is another good point for you to pause and to think what types of examples. So I already gave an example of a private good, something like peanuts. Public good, we gave the example of asteroid defense. So our other two categories, club goods are non-rivalrous and excludable, and common pool goods are non-excludable but rivalrous. So think about different examples, pause and come back, and then we'll take a look at this together. All right, here we are together again, and here are a few examples and the very essential issues that we're dealing with here. So, private goods. As an example, cell phones. You don't get a cell phone unless you pay for it, because it's excludable. And if I'm using my cell phone, you are not able to use you are not able to use the same cell phone. You're able to use your cell phone, but we can't both use my cell phone at the same time. Right? A private good. And markets are basically efficient here. We don't really run into any terribly complicated problems. HBO subscription would fit under a club good. So this is something that's excludable. You don't get it unless you pay for it. But it's also non-rivalrous. So like I said, I'm not using up a show when I'm watching it. But if you would value the show, if you would value access to the good of HBO Max and you'd get $5 of benefit, it would cost HBO about $0 to provide that for you. So that they don't means we've got a little tiny market failure. Not a huge one, but we're missing out on some potential gains from trade. Right? It would cost very little to get you this good, and you don't get the good because the price is higher than your value, even though your value is higher than the marginal cost. That said, we don't really worry too much about club goods as economists. Where we do worry is with public goods, right? So like asteroid defense, industrial standards would be another one. I was recently watching a video about, I forget what NIST stands for. I think it's the North America Industrial Standards Technology, something like that. But having something like a set of standards that defines the different types of screw sizes, or how big should different pieces of lumber be, or what sort of interfaces should be created for electrical items. Those sorts of standards make it possible for different companies to work on different parts of related problems. Those standards are non-rivalrous and non-excludable, right? Think about the idea of what is 1 foot or 1 meter or 1 kilogram. These are industrial standards that are non-rivalrous and non-excludable, and they allow us to work together more effectively. Right? So who's going to make sure that these standards exist? Who's going to define these standards? In practice, we have nonprofits and we have all kinds of different organizations that work on these standards, but it's not as simple as, say, starting a peanut farm where you get paid for every pound of peanuts that you sell. And then the other big one, common pool goods. So fisheries or the atmosphere. We pollute into the atmosphere, or we take fish out of the ocean. When we do this, we are taking away from the resource, right? It is rivalrous in use. So we take fish out of the ocean, there are fewer fish to go around. We put crap into the air, and the air can hold less of our pollution, and the quality is a little bit lower, right? So as we use it, we're affecting other people, but no one can stop us, right? There's no gate preventing us from putting smoke into the air. Because it's non-excludable, we end up overusing it. All right, so these are the basic problems. Now, really, the biggest part of this is excludability. When we make it hard to profit by taking care of a good, we end up with problems. Right? So a really important insight from economics, especially institutional economics, law and economics, these disciplines, subdisciplines dealing with these sorts of issues, a big finding is that property rights matters, right? Or the term I think is a little bit better, decision rights. Thinking carefully about who has what rights to make what decisions matters. Excludability is essentially changing the landscape of rights. So when we make something excludable, we are in effect removing some people's rights to access, but we are defining someone else's right to exclude. And that set of decision rights could lead to a better outcome than if we didn't have that, right? So when we change the rules, we're changing the incentives, and that could impact our ability to either face a problem or to avoid that problem. So we'll see that a little bit more when we dig into common pool resources, but let's start a little bit more with the problems of public goods. And the big problem we face here is the free rider problem. Because it's non-rivalrous and non-excludable, we're in a situation where if someone's going to provide the public good, I do better by avoiding pitching in to pay for the public good. So let's say my neighbor wants to throw a 4th of July fireworks display. They come, door to door asking for people to pitch in. And the more people who pitch in, the better the fireworks they're going to get, right? If people don't pitch in, you get those crappy, annoying fireworks that make a lot of noise and scare your dog, but are lame and not even very exciting to watch more than 2 of go off. And yet they go on for hours and hours and hours all July. So let's imagine Hartford's world of truth, right? We think about what value could we get if we got everyone to pitch in and got the really good fireworks. We could hypothetically get to the optimal outcome. In the real world, I have this incentive to not tell the truth, right? So my neighbor comes and says, hey, I'd like money to have better fireworks, and if I don't pitch in, I'm still going to see the fireworks, but I'm going to have my money to spend on my own private goods that give me private benefits. There might be some social pressure that might get me to contribute a little bit, but maybe I don't contribute as much as I would in the world of truth. So I'm able to get the benefits of the fireworks display without having to pay for it. But the trouble is, if all my neighbors do this, then none of us pitch in and we get a really lame fireworks display. We're saving money, but we're not getting the good that we would hypothetically like to get. So we can't count on people following their rational self-interest to get us a public good. So what can we do about it? Well, this is another good point to pause, right? Pause, think about what can we do about this. Try and, start by pulling what you can out of your head, right? Brainstorm a bunch of stuff in your notes, and then go back into your notes and look at what we talked about when we were talking about externalities. All right, pause, think about it. All right, we're back. What can we do about the free rider problem? Well, our default option is always to just go without. There are many possible public goods that we are currently going without, and it might be inefficient, but nonetheless, right, you can't argue with as straightforward as it is to simply go without. And in some cases, that might even be the optimal solution, right? If the costs exceed the benefits, then, right, it might still be a public good. It's just a public good that isn't worth providing. Now, government provides us a few potential solutions, right? So like I said, the government can force us to do things, such as forcing us to pay our taxes. We pay our taxes, and the town is able to collect our money and put on a fireworks display for us without having to send someone door to door to be turned down by people who rationally decide to free ride, right? Or to take those taxes and subsidize something that's going to provide public goods, something that's going to provide spillovers to the local economy, or just directly providing the public good, right? So we could, use the taxes to provide the public good, or we could think of using the taxes to reduce behavior that is creating a public bad, right? So a Pigouvian tax, just like we talked about with externalities. Now, a really interesting one, I think, my 2 favorite examples of public goods. One is asteroid defense, but my other favorite example of a public good is the English language. The English language is something that we get despite the free rider problem, and we get it without the government. The government isn't taking our money and using it to fund creation of the English language. The English language is something that we create by using it, right? This phrase, incremental accumulation where the marginal private benefit is greater than the marginal private cost, that's essentially what we're doing when we use the English language. We use it because our benefits are high enough to justify the effort that we put into learning the English language. We don't need someone to create this overall. It's something that we're collectively creating. And another thing that we collectively create, not you and I in this room, but people in the world, is things like open source software. So Linux is a program that isn't being created because some organization is turning it into a private good where people pay for it and are otherwise excluded from using it. with Linux, you cannot be excluded from using it. It is an open source piece of software that you can just download and use. People contribute to this, they add to it, they continue to build it because in many cases it's worth something to some company to fix some feature into this, and then it's really cheap to share. So a lot of open source software works like this. So like the React framework is a collection of software for making websites. It was initially created by Facebook, who has a big interest in making it easy to make a lot of software to be run in a browser, right? Which is what React is for. But a lot of other people contribute to it as well. And that's a situation where even though someone is paying for the cost of this and other people are benefiting from it, each individual decision to contribute has this feature where the private benefits are high enough to justify that bit of effort, even though other people are also benefiting. There's also this really neat notion. Let's open this up. David Friedman's idea of a privileged minority. David Friedman, very interesting thinker. He's got his price theory textbook available for $0 on his website. Definitely recommend checking that out over the summer. And his idea here is that even though you might have a public good, there might be a small group within society who is in the position where their private benefits are high enough that they are willing to take on the cost of providing a public good. So you think about something like, if there was an asteroid coming towards Earth, could the American government do something about it? Well, maybe, right? But maybe Congress starts to debate, and Congress, when they start debating, nothing gets done. And so Congress is off, trying to score political points and leaves us all to die because they're just not going to get it. Okay, well, what might actually happen in that case? Well, there might be someone else with access to rockets who decides that it's worth losing a lot of money to not die. So Jeff Bezos, he's got some rockets. Elon Musk, he's got some rockets. Both of them would love to get the press of saving the world from this rogue asteroid. So it might be the case that we get it at the cost of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos spending $1 billion to save the rest of us. And they're happy to do that because it's the greatest ad they could possibly buy to save the world. To say nothing of the fact that they would both prefer to be alive and poorer than dead and not spend any money. So we can get private provision of public goods when the private benefits exceed the private costs. A classic example is TV, right? So back in the 50s, when broadcast TV starts happening, you got this new technology of, entertainment in your home being provided for $0. It was non-excludable, non-rivalrous, just these air signals, these radio waves going out into the air, and your antenna picks them up and you get this free show, right? How do we pay for that? How do we make it so that that is not something where I go through a bunch of costs to set up a TV station and then just lose money and go out of business? Well, the answer is we bundle ads. So we finance this private good with what we might think of as a public bad, right? So it's kind of a public bad, right? So ads going out over the air, it's not something that I want as a user. The ads are a negative part of this good. It's still worth it overall, right? So I watch TV and the ads, but the ads that are a bad for me are a good for the advertiser. They are paying for these because they expect to get more money out of the press than they would out of not having that ad. So by bundling the ad with the TV broadcast, we're able to get the public good of the broadcast privately provided. And then social pressure. This is at the bottom of the list for good reason. I think it's something that we are all tempted to go for, right? In my generation and your generation have both grown up with a lot of this, education about social problems, things like, say, pollution, and then being told, okay, don't pollute, right? We're given a lot of social pressure And that is something that will contribute to reducing the free rider problem. But it's not something where we can depend on this to solve the problem, right? It can help on the margin, but it's not going to be a very strong solution overall. Okay, so overall, we've got this issue of public goods are non-rivalrous and non-excludable, and so they are underprovided. Right? People have incentive to free ride, and when people are free riding, we're not putting enough resources into the creation of these public goods. In some cases, we just go without. In some cases, we get the government to force us to not free ride. In some cases, we get lucky and we have a situation where there are private benefits that give people an incentive to produce this stuff. Sometimes we can throw in TV ads or something similar so that it is worth it for someone to finance these public goods for the rest of us. And sometimes we can get somewhere with some social pressure, right? At least on the margin. Now, to understand common pool resources where things are rivalrous and non-excludable, it's going to be easier if we think about another sort of classic economic story, the prisoner's dilemma. So, let's say Rick and Eli decide to rob the local gas station. The police are going to, eventually find us. They put us in separate interrogation rooms, and maybe they don't have enough evidence to convict, but they're going to try and get us to confess. So I'm in one interrogation room, and they're going to say, hey, Rick, if you confess, we'll pin it all on Eli, right? We'll give you a plea deal. And they're going to give Eli the same plea deal. And what they're going to expect is we're both going to try and take this plea deal and rat on each other, right? So there's the question of what happens if I rat, what happens if Eli rats, what happens if we both rat, what happens if neither of us rats. These are our possible outcomes here. This would be a little bit easier to show on a whiteboard, but basically we can think, player one decides to confess or keep their mouth shut. Player two then confesses or keeps their mouth shut. Or they might be at this branch, confess or keep their mouth shut. Or we could show this on a 2x2 payoff matrix. We'll see a little bit more of this in the textbook when we talk about oligopoly. But basically what's going on here, I'm going to go into here and edit this. So what do we get? If we both keep our mouths shut, we're going to get some trumped up, I don't know how I did that. We're going to get some trumped up charges, and we're going to end up having to do community service or something like that. -1, -1. Pretend like that isn't a strike through. If player one keeps their mouth shut and player two rats on them, player one takes a big hit and player two avoids any punishment. If player one rats on player two and player two keeps their mouth shut, we get the reverse. Player one is able to avoid punishment and player two faces a big punishment. And if they both rat on each other, they both end up paying some sort of a punishment. Right? So we can line these up, put them in here, but let's jump back into this. Can I get this? All right, I have messed this up a little bit. There we go. All right, so this should say -1, -1. So this is an abstract story, right? In this form, we've got this initial story about being thrown in different interrogation cells, but this captures the bare essence of a situation where two people are interacting, where each person's choices affect the incentives faced by the other, where both have a short-run incentive to try to avoid punishment, right? So for player two, if player one's going to rat, player two faces a choice between -10 or -8. They would prefer -8, right? We give them an incentive to rat on player one. If player one is going to keep their mouth shut, player two is looking at face a punishment if they keep their mouth shut, avoid punishment if they rat. So again, they have incentive to rat. And player one's in the same situation. So we have an equilibrium here. We predict that both are going to rat on each other, even though they would both be better off if they kept their mouth shut. They would have -1, if they kept their mouth shut, but by following their individual rationality, they both end up with -8. So, why do we like this story so much? This is kind of, it's not the boy meets girl, but it's like that sort of a story, right? You might have heard this hypothesis that there's like 20 different stories that ever get taught. There's boy meets girl, there's the hero's journey, there's like a handful of basic stories, and all the stories that we tell are just variations on this. So for economics, our equivalent of boy meets girl, our positive, frequently told story is gains from trade. Two people come together, they find a way to interact, and both become better off. The Prisoner's Dilemma, this is more of our King Lear type story. A tragic hero undone by their fatal flaw. In this case, the fatal flaw is that we have an incentive structure that leads people to do the thing that is individually rational but collectively irrational. Why do we like it? It's a really simple story that captures the bare essence of this problem. Now, another term that we use for this is the tragedy of the commons. So this is basically the exact same thing as Rick and Eli knock off a liquor store and get put into separate interrogation cells. But this version of the story is Rick and Eli have access to a fishery, and each of them has incentive to catch too many fish so that the population can't regrow before next year. Or you and I have sheep, and we have a common grazing pasture, and we all put extra sheep on the pasture because that means more wool and more meat. But if we all put too many sheep on, the sheep eat all the grass can't grow back, and next year none of us can have any sheep. So, the tragedy of the commons, again, is the same basic logic as the Prisoner's Dilemma. So we can tell a lot of the same basic stories with this underlying logic. So, what do we do with this underlying logic? Basically, what we've got here is this situation where, because of the structure of the game, both players have incentive to do the uncooperative thing. So we either want to change the structure of the game. So, for example, this dotted line represents the fact that player 1 and player 2 are making their decision at the same time. So player 2 isn't sure if they're up here or down here. One thing we could do is we could say player 1 moves and then player 2 responds. Now in this case, let's say player 1 decides to rat. Player 2 still has incentive to rat in response. But at the very least, they can see that player 1 has kept their mouth shut, and that might be enough for them to say, I'm going to do the thing that is technically not in my self-interest. I'm going to meet trust with trust. So by changing the structure of the game, we might change the way people play the game. Now, the biggest thing is changing the payoffs. So if we can change these numbers, and this is the reason that the police put prisoners in separate interrogation cells, is to set up the numbers in this way. But if we're able to change these numbers, then we're going to be able to change the behavior. So, classically, we've got two basic solutions, and we can take these back into the story themselves. So the two basic solutions are either privatize or regulate. So thinking about the Prisoner's Dilemma, regulation, this is like having a third-party authority impose a solution from the top down. So if me and Eli knock off a liquor store, but we have a boss, we know that if I rat on Eli, I'm not going to be in trouble with Eli. I'm going to be in trouble with Tony. So that is going to change the structure of the payoffs so that now it's not that I avoid punishment by ratting on Eli. I avoid punishment from the police by ratting on Eli, but I invite a much bigger punishment from Tony by ratting on Eli, and therefore I have much lower incentive to do the thing that is non-cooperative, right, within the circle of me, Eli, and Tony. right? I cooperate with the police, but I am not cooperating within the prisoner's dilemma game. The other one is privatize. So if it wasn't me and Eli working together, but just one of us who knocked off the liquor store, now we don't have to worry about someone else. Right? By not having a social problem, right, we've kind of taken ourselves out of this entirely. Now let's think about something like a fishery. So if we have an open fishery and anyone can access it, if we were able to put a fence around it in some way, close access to other people, then the result is that whoever owns the fence, whoever can deny access or allow access, they have incentive to charge people admission, but they also have incentive to not let people draw too many fish out. We've talked about in class the difference between the buffalo and cows in North America. Cows were privatized, and so we have lots and lots of cattle because it's excludable. There's a profit incentive to make sure your cattle survive. Buffalo were set up partly just by nature. It's hard to domesticate buffalo, partly by legal structure as a way to just be jerks to the Native Americans. But by making it harder to privatize buffalo, it made it so that there was less incentive to protect the buffalo population, and as a result, the buffalo population collapsed. We got the basic tragedy of the commons. You make it a common pool resource, and you end up with common pool outcomes. Another example, you might experience this if you have roommates. When you have roommates, the kitchen sink is always full of dirty dishes. When you make enough money that you don't have roommates anymore, your sink becomes clean because it's you, right? It's your dishes. You leave dishes in the sink, you have to clean them up. When you have roommates, you leave dishes in the sink, maybe your roommate ends up cleaning them up for you, but you definitely have all your roommates facing that incentive and leaving their junk in the sink. What can you do about that? Privatize would be you get your own sink. Regulate would be you come up with some rules to make sure that we aren't imposing these costs on each other. So the fishery, right, an example there would be having a fishing season. It might be really hard to have a fence around the North Atlantic cod. It might be much easier to say we are not going to allow people to fish in the months of October through April, or whatever the case might be. Right? But regulation can help to reduce access so that we reduce that overuse problem. Different scenarios, regulation might be easier to introduce than privatization. Other cases, it might be the other way around. Now, another way we can think about what's going on with these prisoner's dilemma type problems is we could think about them as basically a situation where we have these incentives leading us to the bad outcome, even though we'd like to be at the good outcome. What we need is to coordinate. So the prisoner's dilemma as a coordination problem is a way of thinking about this where we're thinking about how do we get people to make the right choice at the right time. So when we are independently deciding, we have this individual incentive that says, I can get a smaller punishment by ratting on you. But if we can coordinate our decisions and say, I'm willing to give up that short-run impact if I can guarantee that you and I collectively get to our good outcome of we both keep our mouths shut, right? If we're able to coordinate our behavior, right, that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. So we could have Tony Soprano to help us to coordinate our behavior, right? Or we could reduce our need to coordinate by behaving privately, by creating situations where we aren't imposing a prisoner's dilemma negative outcome on each other. Likewise, something like, say, beach cleanups, right? This is effectively a coordination solution to a prisoner's dilemma problem. If you're on the beach, you could just litter, and that's going to make your life a little bit easier. And if everyone does that, then the beach gets really gross, and we lose access to having a clean beach. But if we all get together and make an event of it, and we all work, in a coordinated fashion to keep this shared space clean, then we're going to be able to avoid some of these common pool problems. An interesting historical example is mutual aid societies. So you think of the question of, we feel bad when we know that there are people out there who are poor, who need help, and so maybe we want something like welfare. We want unemployment insurance. So if you lose your job, there's going to be some support for you. Well, what did we do before we had government provided welfare? We had mutual aid societies. So things like a church helps the parishioners. If I'm a member of a church or a member of the Elks Lodge or the Lions Club or whatever else, if I run into problems, then the people in that community help me. If my fellow community members run into problems, I help them. Right? And we're able to, coordinate in a way that we're able to provide sort of this local good that helps each other. How do we get this? Well, we need to have people willing to continue to provide for this. And mutual aid societies are an interesting case because historically the ones that did the best were the ones where they socially drank together. So when the Lions Club or the Knights of Columbus has a bar in their clubhouse and they like hanging out with each other, it's a lot easier for them to get together and help Gary, who broke his leg at work last week, and make sure that he's going to be okay. Another sort of class of potential solutions here we've mentioned a little bit is those that we've seen, those that Elinor Ostrom studied. Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009, and she studied a lot of these interesting situations where small communities had some common pool resource that they were able to work together to conserve. So we talked about examples of irrigation systems, forestry, common pastures, fisheries, lots and lots of things where you need a lot of people working together effectively to deal with that problem. Right? I forgot the biggest example of a common pool resource for Long Island certainly is rush hour traffic, right? Non-excludable, but very rivalrous. That's a case where we're definitely not using these Ostrom-type solutions. But there are cases that Ostrom found where things like social norms were able to coordinate people's behavior to do the pro-social thing, where we had the conditions right and people were basically self-regulating to collectively manage things, not from the top down, but as sort of an organic bottom-up sort of a situation. Now, can we count on that to solve something like traffic on the LIE? Probably not. Could you do something like this to manage you and your roommates having too much junk in the sink? Yeah, right? Under the right conditions, these are very Coasian type solutions. If transaction costs are relatively low, it's going to be much easier to come up with these types of outcomes. Definitely encourage you to learn more about what Elinor Ostrom had to say. Check out her Nobel Prize lecture when you get a chance. Read her books. They're fantastic. Very, very lucid description of how you can deal with these sorts of problems. So, do we have it? Do we have just the solutions here? Well, there's definitely no panaceas. We can't just say always regulate or always privatize or always look for these Ostrom-type solutions. There's always going to be costs and benefits. There's always going to be some sort of difficulties. Right? Regulation, you have to think about enforcement costs. You also have to think about what sort of political inefficiencies might you have. We talked a little bit about bootleggers and Baptists. We'll see more of that next week. Privatizing, we saw some examples where it's definitely not going to be easy. Privatizing the atmosphere is not an option. There are some common pools we might privatize. So you look at something like, say, the LIE. You could turn a freeway into a toll road, and you could, hypothetically, set it up as a toll road where the owner of the toll road has a strong incentive to make sure the traffic is always flowing. If you have a toll road where the price can go up and down in response to what the conditions are, if there's a lot of people on the road, the toll goes way up. You can have a toll road that is able to make sure that the road is always functioning effectively as a road. But privatizing the entire road might be viable, but privatizing parts of the road or privatizing your access to the road as an individual driver, much, much more difficult, right? You think about trying to impose Coasian solutions to the pollution from the road, and you'd see how difficult it would be to have a Ostrom type solution to the traffic on the road. And Ostrom solutions in general, right, require learning, which is not straightforward. Learning is hard, which is why you guys have to spend so much time practicing on MindTap and coming into class and rewriting your notes and going to study sessions in order to internalize these things. Coming up with the Ostrom solutions, they're not guaranteed, they're non-obvious solutions, they're going to be harder to come by. They're something that we learn a lot from, but they're hard, right? They're not easy. And this is the nature of this problem. When we have things that are, let's go back. When we have things that are non-rivalrous and non-excludable, we run into sort of this underlying problem of we can't count on natural incentives to lead to the right outcome. And we'll see when we talk about the economics of politics that we also have this fundamental problem that even though we could have the government force our hands and force us to do the right thing, we still run into the issue of politics itself has a lot of these common pool problems. All right, so that is common pools and public goods in a nutshell. We also saw private goods, which is what we've mostly been thinking about, and club goods, which is more of an interesting curiosity. Again, this is within this larger context where pursuing individual rationality isn't necessarily leading us to a collectively irrational outcome. It's very similar to what we saw with externalities, slightly different, kind of a different angle on the same sort of a problem. Sometimes you look at it from one perspective versus the other, and it becomes a little bit easier to understand a situation. But certainly something that can help us to deal with these problems. Let me close just really quickly with an example of how these categories can be a little bit messy and how thinking about a situation from a different perspective might help you to address a different aspect of that problem. So let's just go back to full screen. So if you think about something like a gym, if you go to LA Fitness at 5 o'clock on a weekday, you find that it is very much a common pool resource. There are not enough machines to go around, they are rivalrous, and there are so many people in there that it is effectively non-excludable. Now, the people who are there are literally the ones who paid to be there, right? So some people are being excluded, but at 5 o'clock, not enough people are being excluded. Within the set of people who have a membership to a gym, you're effectively in this position of, during these peak periods, having a common pool resource. And you'll see some gyms have different memberships. You can pay extra to have access at peak times, and you can save money by getting a membership that doesn't give you access at 5 o'clock. And that is the gyms using economic reasoning to ameliorate that problem, to reduce that common pool problem. By the same token, right, at 2 in the morning, the gym is effectively a club good, right? It's a health club. You are excluded if you don't pay your dues, but in the middle of the night, there are more than enough machines to go around. So it's effectively a club good. If you don't like either of those, you buy your own equipment, you set it up in your backyard, and you've got your own private gym. You've made it a private good. And then you think about, well, there's a public aspect. Even if you are thinking about working out in your own backyard, you are providing a public good to everyone else to the extent that we worry that other people are going to have to pay for your health decisions. And we are increasingly moving into that sort of a world where more and more of our health costs get funneled through insurance companies. We're effectively able to spread the costs of our poor health decisions onto other people. So if I don't exercise, if I start smoking cigarettes, that's going to increase the cost faced by insurance companies, which is going to increase the premiums that you pay for having a health plan. And so if you can get me to start exercising and to quit smoking, even though I get a lot of those private health benefits, since I was previously able to force some of those costs on other people, that gym membership might also have a public good aspect to it. All right, now, let me not exactly close on pointing out how this can be confusing. So we've seen how taking a problem from different angles, we can look at it from different perspectives, and from those different perspectives, that might induce us to think about different things we might want to do, different responses we might want to have. We might want to subsidize exercise because it's a public good. We might want to, say, put a market in place to reduce access to gyms at peak times. Depending on how we look at a problem is going to affect what we might want to do about it, and there's an art to it, right? It's not something where you can just follow a formula. But the most important thing to take away from this lecture is this distinction between things being rivalrous or not and excludable or not. The very short version is when things are excludable, things basically work out okay. When things are non-excludable, we run into problems. And we run into two basic types of problems, either under provision of public goods, because it is non-rivalrous, we want more of it, right? It's optimal to have lots and lots of this stuff because it's providing all this good to people who had no part, who are just getting this bonus value, right? It's like a positive externality, and we don't produce enough of them. With common pools, our basic problem is overuse. Because it's rivalrous but non-excludable, we use it up. We take too much time on the freeway, right? We add to traffic, right? So when I get on the freeway, I am using up limited space. I'm making it that much more congested, but there's no one there to stop me. If I want to get to work, or if I want to go to IKEA or wherever, I have a zero price, so I have too little incentive to prevent me from contributing to that problem. All right, so public goods, common pools, excludability, rivalry in a nutshell. As usual, if you have any questions, let me know in the usual places, and I will talk to you in the future.